Chapter 49. There were over a dozen people of all ages inside the tent. Michael watched them warily as he entered. Many of them were dressed in costumes, but others were wearing casual clothing. He didn't recognize any of them. "Damn it, I hate this dress," the blonde woman said as she came in behind him and made sure to close the flap. "Excuse me, folks. I need to get changed." The group parted. Now that they had moved, Michael could see various things scattered throughout the tent. In the very center was a large block of ice on some kind of table or altar. It was such an odd thing to see that he regarded it in confusion for a few seconds. He determined that it must be used in one of the carnival's exhibitions. The woman crossed to the back of the tent where a folding room divider had been placed. She went back behind the divider, and after a moment, the blue dress she had been wearing was flung over the top of it. He automatically averted his eyes, even though he couldn't see her as she continued to get changed. "I'm going to assume that you're Michael Dyer," the woman said. He didn't respond. "And now I'm going to assume from your silence that I'm right," she continued. "My name is Lisbeth Erickson. Myself and these fine folks are members of this carnival. Well, I suppose saying that we were is more accurate." "Jumping ship now that Leo is dead?" Michael asked, watching the gathered people warily. There was a pause. "Leo is dead? I didn't know that. They're dropping like flies tonight. No, we're done because Poe is dead." "Poe's dead? Those gunshots." "She is, but that's not the part that really matters." Lisbeth came back out from behind the divider, now wearing jeans, a black shirt, and a leather coat. "All that matters is that the leashes are off, and they need to stay that way." She turned her attention to the other people gathered in the tent. They watched her silently as she appeared to be gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice was positive and upbeat. "It's been some time coming, but we're finally here," Lisbeth said with a smile. "No more being at someone else's whim. No more answering a snap of someone's finger. It doesn't matter what happened to get us here, just that it did." The group of people nodded and murmured in agreement. "So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to get the hell out of here. We can't take the risk that this is just temporary. You need to get out beyond the carnival's influence." "You're talking like you're not coming with us," a muscular man in his 30s said. Lisbeth shook her head slightly. "That's because I'm not, Jack. Not right away, anyway. I'm going to make sure that this place can't hurt anyone ever again. We know this all starts and ends with this bingo that Poe wouldn't shut up about." "We'll stay and help." She raised her hand as the people began to agree. "Listen, everyone, I appreciate it. I appreciate it more than you can possibly know. If it was just us adults, I would take you up on the offer. It's not, though." Michael looked down at the children watching her. Whether the group had intended to or not, they were standing in a protective semicircle around the youngest members. It was clear that they took the safety of the children seriously. "I need all of you to get the children clear," Lisbeth said. "There's Strigoi out there, and we all know what those vultures will do to a defenseless child. Keep them safe, and keep each other safe. Mr. Dyer here just told us that Leo is dead. Break into his trailer and get the keys to the trucks. I promise that I'll meet up with all of you later." After checking to make sure that the coast was clear, the people quietly left the tent. Lisbeth hugged each one of them as they passed by, the smile on her face not quite hiding the worry in her eyes. When the last of them had gone, she turned away and quickly swiped at the corner of one eye with her hand. "They'll be fine," she said, more to herself than to her guest. "I'm completely lost," Michael admitted. "What the hell is going on here? Why are you not trying to kill me right now?" She turned back towards him as if she had forgotten that he was there. "Oh, right. I imagine that this is pretty confusing. Everyone you've run into here has been trying to kill you, and suddenly, well, this." Lisbeth went back behind the divider briefly before reappearing with a black ribbon in her hand. She used it to tie up her hair in a bun while watching him closely. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What have you already figured out?" she asked. "I'm not sure what you're asking me," Michael replied. "You're obviously an intelligent man, Mr. Dyer. I've seen you listening to every single word that's been said in this tent and dissecting them. Tell me what you've already got figured out." He shrugged. "Nothing completely. It sounds like this Carnival, or maybe Poe in particular, had some sort of control over the people that work here. Now that control is gone, and you're looking to get everyone out of Dodge on the chance it comes back. I'm guessing that whatever this control was, it wasn't anything along the lines of blackmail. You're talking about something more like mind control." Lisbeth tapped the side of her head. "Much more. Imagine watching yourself being danced around like a marionette on its strings, and you're not too far off." "Convenient. I'd hardly call it that." "Oh, really?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "You don't think that I'd find it convenient that with everything going on, the people who work here suddenly have an excuse as to why they're not responsible when things are suddenly crumbling down around them?" She seemed to want to respond, but instead of doing so, she simply glared at him. He was finding her to be extremely difficult to read. Normally he could tell if a person was lying to him, or at least if the whole truth wasn't being told, but it was difficult with her. She was either telling the truth, or she was an extremely good con artist. "This isn't going to work," she said finally. "What isn't?" he asked. "This. I thought maybe you and I could work together to shut down this carnival, but you've got no reason to trust me, and I don't have time to convince you otherwise." Michael looked at her incredulously. "Of course I don't trust you. I don't even know who the hell you are, or what your role is in any of this." "You want to know what my role is?" Lisbeth shot back. "Fine. I'm the person that kidnapped the sheriff's wife and put her in the Sea Lodge." His eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched. "She came in here, and I used the powers that Poe gave me to put her to sleep," she continued. "I temporarily froze her system to knock her out. After that, I moved her to the lodge so that Leo and Poe could use her as a bargaining chip. I didn't want to. I even tried to fight against it, but I couldn't. Poe had her hooks deep in my mind, and there was no stopping it. So there you have it. I'm a big part of the reason why you're here in the first place. It wasn't the first time that I did something like that, but it will damn sure be the last. You or the sheriff can kill me later for it, and I probably deserve that. But first get out of my way and let me try to fix this. We have very little time before Call's body emerges in the lodge." Michael examined her closely. She was angry, yes, but there was more to it than that. There was also sadness and shame, along with more than a little determination. What he didn't see in her face or eyes was deceit. He again visited the possibility that she was just simply an incredible liar, but he didn't think so. She believed what she was saying. She was also a source of information. Everything was rapidly coming to a head, and he needed every advantage that he could get. If there was a way to use the carnival against Bingo, or to stop it from being a factor entirely, she might be the key to figuring it out. "Both Bingo and Poe said that name," he said slowly. "You want me to trust you? Tell me who or what Call is." "I told you I don't have time for this," Lisbeth replied impatiently. "Make the time." She sighed. "Fine. I'm not some kind of expert on Call, but Poe talked about it when I was nearby a few times. From what I understand, Call is an ancient deity that somehow got stranded on Earth way before anything resembling life began here. Fast forward to present day, and Poe made a deal with it. Incredible powers, including the power to save Bingo's life and make her whack job companion stronger, in exchange for victims to feed Call's soul and keep it alive. That's where I'm getting lost, Michael admitted. Call's soul and body became separated somehow? I don't know how. I wasn't around for those conversations, if there were any. From what I understand, Call's body is technically dead, but it still maintains some semblance of life. It's in some place called the Lodge, and I don't think it's the same lodge as the Sea Lodge. Or maybe the two are connected somehow. Like I said, I don't know that part. He furrowed his brow. Okay, so the body is dying, so Call decides to split its spirit off. Yeah, I think that's how it works. That way it can find a way to sustain itself and eventually fully resurrect its body and reunite with it. That's where Poe's bargain comes in. Something clicked into place. But Bingo wants more, doesn't he? He sees a wounded god and thinks to himself that there's got to be a way to take all that power for himself. The easiest way would be to have Poe use her power to take every last drop from Call's body, but she's gone now. He seems to know another way to get his hands on it. Lisbeth crossed her arms. That's all that I know about it. Will you let me pass now? Michael stared at her for a long moment. All right, he said as he came to a decision and opened the tent flap. Let's go. Chapter 50. You said that you put Jenni to sleep with your powers, Michael said as they made their way towards the Sea Lodge. Yes, Lisbeth confirmed. Care to elaborate on that? You're testing me. Not really. I'm trying to figure out what we're working with here. What can you do exactly? She shrugged. Outside of this carnival? Absolutely nothing. My powers and everyone else here that has got them from Poe, who pulled them from the carnival itself. More accurately, from Call's presence here. What can you do while you're in the carnival boundaries? Lisbeth held up one hand and clenched it into a fist. As Michael watched, her already pale skin turned completely white, and a layer of frost began to form over it. That frost soon turned into thick ice that stuck out like spines. She unclenched her fist and the ice became tiny snowflakes that fell lightly to the ground before melting. Does that answer your question? She asked, not even bothering to look at him. So you control ice, he said in wonder. No, more than that. You generate your own supply by, what? Freezing the moisture on your skin and in the air? She turned towards him in surprise. That's amazingly accurate. Most people just think that I'm some kind of human ice machine. I've seen it before. Not in a person, but from an ancient chalice from Greenland. This only works inside the carnival? Yes, and I don't know for how long. I feel them fading a little more every minute since Poe died. They stopped talking as a Strigoi appeared from around the corner. It was walking on all fours, its arms sticking out at awkward angles as it pulled itself forward. It tilted its skull-like face up towards them and opened its jaws, the cicada sound filling the air. Michael took out his dagger, but before he could do anything else, Lisbeth stretched out her arm with her hand open. She closed her fingers as if she was gripping onto some unseen object before quickly turning her hand to one side. The Strigoi's head followed the motion before its neck snapped. It collapsed to the ground, the cicada song going silent. Okay then, Michael said as he put the knife away. I froze the fluids around its spinal column and broke its neck, Lisbeth said calmly. Oh, is that all? Just casually broke its neck with ice? It should be reassuring to you. If I wanted you or anyone else dead, you'd be dead. He had no idea how to respond to that. They continued on and approached the Sea Lodge. He felt a huge sense of relief as he saw Jenni sitting on the edge of the porch. He had feared that they had taken too much time. Maggie saw them and waved before touching Jenni on the shoulder and saying something. Jenni looked up and watched them approach without responding. Her eyes narrowed, and he could see that her attention was on Lisbeth, You okay? Maggie asked, her own eyes locked on his companion. I'm good, he assured her. Where are Sarah and Josh? It's a bit of a long story, but they're in the Sea Lodge. They're okay. Michael opened his mouth to reply, but before he could say anything, Jenni had jumped off the side of the porch and charged towards him. He was taken by surprise, and he stumbled backwards as she pushed him off to one side and lunged at Lisbeth. She knocked her to the ground and wrapped her hands around the woman's neck. Did you think I wouldn't fucking recognize you? She demanded. You're the bitch that did this to me. Maggie wrapped her arms around her wife and attempted to pull her off. Jenni struggled and continued to squeeze. Michael quickly joined the sheriff, and together they managed to pry her off. She continued to struggle, a wild look in her eyes, and her teeth bared. What the fuck is going on? Maggie demanded. It's a long story, Michael said through gritted teeth as he struggled to hold on. Jenni, I need you to listen to me. She didn't want to take you. She was forced to. We need you to calm down. You fucking trust her? Jenni demanded, continuing to thrash. After what she did? You're supposed to be my friend. Thinking quickly, he leaned forward so that his mouth was right next to her ear. He lowered his voice so that only she could hear him. No, I don't trust her, he whispered. She might be telling the truth, or she might not. Right now, though, we need her. Jenni turned her head and locked eyes with him. He nodded once before letting go of her. He was half convinced that she was going to use the opportunity to continue her assault, but instead, she collected herself and took a few deep breaths. I'm okay, she said. You can let go of me, Maggie. Maggie glanced at Michael before slowly releasing her grip. Jenni straightened up and brushed her dark hair out of her face as her breathing returned to normal. Her eyes remained locked on Lisbeth. Lisbeth slowly got to her feet, her hand against her throat. Michael could see the bruises begin to form around her neck from the throttling she had received. He felt a twinge of sympathy for her, but he made sure not to let any sign of it show in front of Jenni. We don't have much time, he said. Bingo will be coming for Call's body soon, and to do that, he needs to get into the lodge. If he succeeds in what he's trying to do, we're all screwed. Not just us, not just Lamplight Woods, but everyone. And what exactly is he trying to do? Maggie asked. He's going to try to take the powers of a god for himself. I don't... Michael trailed off, his eyes going wide. The last piece of the puzzle clicked together in the back of his mind. Oh, fuck me, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. I know what he's going to do. What? Maggie demanded. What's he going to do? His soul is inside of a demon body now, right? And that demon is taking the form of a local legend. Skin rot, yes. I'm still not following. The stories about skin rot state that he can basically become any person that he devours. What if that doesn't just apply to humans? Bingo is going to literally eat a god to become one himself. Would someone please tell me what the hell you are talking about? Jenni asked. Michael gave a quick rundown about what he knew about the Carnival and Bingo's plans. He went through everything. The Carnival's true nature as an extension of Bingo's circus extravaganza, the spirit of the ancient deity that was attached to it, the attack of Forgotten Tales, everything he could think of. Jenni occasionally interjected with a question, but Lisbeth simply listened silently. Okay, Jenni said simply when he had finished. I think we're all on the same page now. That's it? Michael replied in surprise. That's it. I just spent a year in a beach house hiding from fish people. I'm ready to accept just about anything. How do we stop this Bingo guy? That's easy, a voice called from behind them. You don't. They all turned to find Bingo slowly strolling towards them. He was smiling, revealing his nightmarish face with a wide grin and insanity-filled eyes. He was walking like he didn't have a care in the world, his hands in his pockets, and his stride slow and casual. See, that's the part that old Mikey here is leaving out, Bingo said as he drew closer. There is no stopping me. Chapter 51. Michael impacted hard with the side of the sea lodge, and for a moment he was sure that he was going to black out. His head cleared after a few seconds, however, and he painfully forced himself to stand back up. He nearly lost his balance again, but he somehow managed to stay upright. It had been less than a minute since Bingo had attacked them, and already it was obvious that they were horribly outmatched. Maggie had put 6 rounds of the Peacemaker into him at extremely close range, and he hadn't even seemed to notice. Michael had jammed his knife into the creature's eye, and not only did it not do anything, he had been tossed aside like a doll for his trouble. Lisbeth was faring a bit better. As he watched, she began to encase individual parts of Bingo's body in ice, first freezing his arms and then his legs. He threw back his head and laughed loudly. Now this one's got some fight to her, he declared. Come on, don't be shy. Show me what you've got. She set her feet and stretched out both hands. A large blast of bluish-white ice blasted out of them and struck him with tremendous force. For the first time, Bingo seemed to be affected by something that had been done to him, and he turned away as the ice continued to hammer him. Not bad, he admitted, his voice barely audible over the rush of ice and air. Impressive, even. I can feel Poe behind it, though. With her gone, I wonder how long you can keep it up. Michael knew that it wouldn't be very long before Lisbeth would have to stop. The strain was obvious on her face, and sweat was pouring down from her forehead. He didn't know exactly how her powers worked or the strain they placed on her, but it looked like she was trying to push against something incredibly heavy. Knowing that he only had a few seconds, he ran forward as he pulled the small black stone out of his pocket. The draconite felt warm in his hand as he gripped it tightly. Bingo had started to turn back towards Lisbeth as the force of the ice began to weaken, and his crazed eyes caught sight of Michael just as he opened his hand and pushed the stone as hard as he could into the creature's forehead. Michael was suddenly off of his feet again and flying backwards. He was vaguely aware that the draconite had exploded as it had made contact with Bingo. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion, and he felt the heat of the flames as they engulfed the creature just before the roar of the detonation reached his ears. This time Michael did black out. He wasn't sure how long he was out. One moment he was airborne, and the next he was being roused by Maggie calling his name. His vision was blurred, and her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. He tried to speak, but he wasn't able to. Jenni moved into his field of vision. She put a hand gently on his chest as she looked into his eyes. Apparently not liking what she saw, she shook her head and turned her attention to her wife. He couldn't make out most of what she was saying, but he did catch the word concussion as she spoke. There was a rushing sound in his ears. It was like a heavy wind blowing through a tunnel, and it grew louder and louder as the seconds ticked on. The intensity continued to build, and just when he thought that it couldn't possibly get any stronger without bursting his skull, it was gone and he could hear normally again. We don't have that option, Lisbeth was saying out of his view. I don't know how to stop any of this. Do you? Because if so, I'm open to suggestions. Maybe you missed the part where he just blew himself up to stop that whatever it was, Jenni replied irritably. He's got a concussion, most likely a severe one, and minor burns across his body. I can't be sure, but I think he's got a couple of ribs that are at least bruised, if not broken. He's in no condition to be doing anything but going to a hospital. I'm okay, Michael said in a weak voice. He attempted to sit up, but Jenni's hand forced him back down. No, you're not okay, she told him bluntly. Stay still. Aw, did Mikey fall down and go boom? Michael felt the hope that he had been holding on to slip away as he heard the voice. Ignoring Jenni's objections, he forced himself up onto his elbows and looked towards the spot where the draconite had detonated. Small flames were still licking the ground. and a cloud of smoke had been whipped up where the dirt had been disrupted. Stepping out of that cloud was Bingo. "That's impossible," Maggie said in a voice barely above a whisper. "There isn't a scratch on him." "I'm full of all sorts of impossibilities," Bingo said as he drew closer. "Absolutely brimming with them. Filled all the way to the tippy top with them." Lisbeth stepped in front of him and, in one smooth motion, created a pointed icicle and threw it at him. It began to crumble even before it reached him, however, and he easily swatted it away. He grinned at her in amusement. "Looks like you're all out of gas," he commented. Bingo reached up and grabbed her hand. She struggled against his grip, but he barely seemed to notice. He leaned in close. In a last-ditch attempt to free herself, she hit him as hard as she could in the crotch with her knee. "Just for that, I'm not going to kill you," he told her. "Compared to what I have planned when I ascend to godhood, death would have been merciful. You just had to insult me by going after the family jewels, though." He squeezed her hand closed. Lisbeth screamed as the bones snapped like twigs. He kept applying more and more pressure until she was forced down onto her knees. When he finally released her hand, she fell to her side and clutched it. "So who's next?" Bingo asked as he came closer. "How about you, Sheriff? You look like you're dressed for a fight. I don't know you very well, though. Maybe you're more the type that likes to watch. What do you say? Want to see me tear apart your better half first?" "You stay the fuck away from her," Maggie snarled as she pointed the peacemaker at him. "Oh, right. Because the first half a dozen shots you put into me worked so well, right? You're threatening me with the equivalent of a pea shooter." Before she could react, he closed the distance between them and snatched the gun out of her hand. He examined it for a moment before easily breaking it in half. He tossed the remains onto the ground at her feet. "Aw, I think I broke your toy," he said with false remorse. Maggie backed up, taking Jenni with her. Bingo laughed at them before turning his attention to Michael. The creature reached down and grabbed him by the collar, using it to pull him up to his feet. He nearly threw up as he was racked with dizziness and nausea. Bingo continued to lift him until he was completely off the ground. Despite his condition, he looked directly into those insane eyes and refused to flinch. If he was going to die, he was going to do it while giving this monster as little satisfaction as possible. "You're coming with me, Mikey," Bingo said, his face inches away. "I want you to see me take my first steps towards godhood. I'm going to make you watch as I rip the heart out of this world just as easily as I did Evelyn's." Bingo threw him back onto the ground and stood over him. The creature raised its foot. Michael knew what was coming, but in his weakened state, he wasn't able to do anything about it. He closed his eyes and gritted his teeth as Bingo stomped down onto his leg. The bone instantly snapped, and one of the broken ends pierced through the skin. He cried out in agony. "There," Bingo said in satisfaction. "Now you won't be able to run away." Michael barely heard him. His leg felt like it was on fire. A part of his mind noted that his mutilated finger was burning as well. He felt himself beginning to pass out. His body had been through so much trauma in such a short amount of time that it was completely shutting down. He had a vague sense of Maggie and Jenni rushing forward to try to get Bingo away from him. The creature easily tossed them away like they were no more than flies. His grin growing even larger, he hooked the back of Michael's shirt with his fingers and began to drag him towards the steps of the sea lodge. "Time to get the party started," Bingo said, walking towards the open doorway. Chapter 52. No matter how hard Sarah tried, she couldn't get even one of the people on the beach to respond to her. She had lost count of the number of times that she had tried using Crowley's code to wake one or more of the Lamplight Woods residents, but after what had to have been at least the 10th attempt, she gave up. Either she was doing something wrong, or the code just didn't have enough power left in it to get the job done. Swearing in frustration, she looked over at Josh. He had taken up position on the top step leading from the beach into the house. From there he could see both her and through the house to the door leading back to Lamplight Woods. His attention was firmly towards the door. "Josh?" she called out. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know," he replied. "There was something going on out in the carnival, but I couldn't make it out. Whatever it was, it's over now." "This isn't working. I can't get them to wake up. We need to find my dad and see if he can figure something out." She glanced out over the water. "That thing is getting a lot closer, too." Josh didn't reply. Instead, his eyes opened wide and he quickly backed down the steps and onto the sand. A man that she didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. He looked around for a moment before nodding to himself. He slowly descended the stairs. Another person came into view. He was being dragged by the first man, and he appeared to be severely injured. He yelped in pain each time his leg struck one of the stairs as he was pulled onto the beach. The standing man turned his head towards Sarah. He smiled, and as he did so his entire face contorted. The grin became impossibly wide, and his lips melted away to expose red gums and white fang-like teeth. His eyes nearly bulged out of his head, twitching erratically as they locked onto her. She may not have recognized the body, but she certainly recognized the presence. "Bingo," Sarah whispered. "In the flesh," Bingo replied, somehow hearing her. "Actual flesh this time, too. Not that B-grade crap cloth and fur I used to have. How have you been, sweetie?" She looked closer at the man he was dragging. Her heart sank as she realized that it was her father. She took a step forward, but before she could get any closer, he turned his face towards her and shook his head weakly. She stopped moving. "Come on, Sarah," Bingo taunted. "Don't you want to come give Uncle Bingy a nice big hug?" "Eat shit," she replied. "What a potty mouth you have on you. Somebody really should wash it out with soap. Oh, I know. You're upset that we haven't had that one-on-one playtime that I promised you that day you visited me. Don't worry, kitten. I haven't forgotten. We'll have plenty of time to play after I finish my business here. Now who do we have here?" Bingo turned his attention towards Josh. She could see him visibly flinch as he stared into those madness-filled eyes, but he stayed where he was and held his ground. While his bravery was commendable, she wished that he would create more separation between them. "I don't think we've had the pleasure of being acquainted," Bingo said. "I'm Bingo, of the world's famous Bingo Circus Extravaganza. I'm sure that Sarah has told you all about me. Good to meet you, Josh Taylor." "Likewise," Josh replied sarcastically. No, that's all wrong." Bingo rolled his eyes. "You're supposed to be surprised that I know your name and stammer something about demanding to know how I know. Then I'm supposed to say that I know about everything that happens in Lamplight Woods in a rather menacing tone. You're taking all the fun out of this." "I'm sure I'll lose all kinds of sleep over that." "Oh, I'm sure that you won't." Bingo tilted his head slightly. "Not like you do over your dead parents, right? How horrible for you, having to watch mommy butcher daddy, blood spraying everywhere. How long did that police officer have to scrub to get it off your face? 10 minutes? 20? Josh didn't answer. "Too hard of a question?" Bingo continued. "Here's an easier one for you. Why do you smell of little Sarah here?" Bingo laughed and threw Sarah's father off to one side. He took a step towards Josh, but he abruptly stopped and looked back over at Sarah. It took her a moment to figure out that he wasn't looking at her, but instead at something behind her. She hesitated for a few seconds before turning to see what he was staring at. The huge object that had been approaching the beach had arrived. Her mind reeled away from it. She couldn't even begin to understand what she was seeing, and it was like she couldn't remain focused on it for more than a split second. In a way, she was both seeing and not seeing it at the same time. "No human can look upon a god," Bingo said, suddenly directly next to her. "Mortal eyes aren't up to the task." She jumped, the shock of his voice and presence snapping her back to the situation at hand. He moved past her towards the being. She used the opportunity to dart back up the beach towards the house. She reached her father and knelt down next to him. "Dad," she said in a near panic, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Please tell me that you're okay." He looked up at her, his eyes out of focus and his expression confused. His skin was burned in multiple places, and there was blood in his hair. She looked down at his leg and felt her stomach tighten. It had been broken so severely that pieces of bone were jutting out through the skin. He tried to say something, but his voice was too quiet for her to hear. She leaned down closer. "Key," he muttered weakly. "What?" she asked. "Dad, I don't understand." "You really are everything that your reputation says you are, Call," Bingo was saying to the incomprehensible creature. "This form you've taken is, well, it's just incredible. There's no way that I can consume you like this. Luckily, I don't have to." Sarah turned just in time to watch as Bingo pulled a key out of his pocket. It was the same key that her father had found while investigating the demon attacks months earlier. He examined it for a moment before pointing it towards Call. "This isn't your real body, is it, you little minx?" he said playfully. "No, this is all just an illusion you've set up for yourself. Poe hadn't even considered that you'd do something like this. She thought drawing you out would be as easy as lining up these nice folks as bait. I'm not interested in the smoke and mirrors, though. I've only got eyes for the real you. You're in there somewhere, aren't you? Inside the depths of the lodge. Luckily for me, I happen to have an all-access pass to your section of this godforsaken place. I'm also a very patient man. I'll keep looking until I find you." Bingo turned slightly to his left and extended the key. It seemed to disappear into thin air. He turned his hand, and with a quiet creaking noise, a door opened out of nowhere. Sarah couldn't see much from the angle that she was at, but she could just make out what looked like a hallway. It was like he had just opened a door that had been painted to look like the world around it. He looked over at her and gave her one of his demonic smiles. "This is goodbye for now," he said, waving at her. "We probably won't be seeing each other for a while. I'll make you this promise, though. Whether it takes me minutes, or days, or weeks, or months, or even years, I will be back. And you, and what's left of your father, will get exactly what you have coming to you. Toodles for now, dear." With a final echoing laugh, he stepped through the door and slammed it shut behind him, the doorway vanishing into thin air. Chapter 53. Sarah opened her eyes and sat bolt upright with a gasp. 1 minute she had been kneeling by her father on the beach, and the next she was here, wherever here was. She was in a grassy field with a soft, cool breeze blowing against her face. The change of scenery was jarring, and it took a few moments for her brain to adjust. Once it had, she stood up and tried to get her bearings. It wasn't until she saw the bridge off in the distance that she realized that she was standing in the field just outside of Lamplight Woods. The carnival was completely gone, and as far as she could tell, there was no trace of it having ever been there. The sun was beginning to come up over the trees to the east. She stared at the dim orange light in confusion. The night had seemed to go on forever, and now the day was finally coming. It seemed somehow unnatural. Welcome, but unnatural. She heard a soft moan from behind her. She turned to find Josh sitting up in the grass. He ran his hand over his face and looked up at her. Without a word, he got up and took her hand. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tired. "I don't know," she admitted. "The last thing I remember is Bingo walking through that door, and then nothing. It feels..." He took a deep breath. "It feels like we lost." She hesitated before saying, "Yeah, it does." Other people were starting to stand up all throughout the field. One by one, they got to their feet and began to head towards town. They all looked like they were in a daze, almost as if they were sleepwalking. She recognized many of them from inside the sea lodge. These were the people that had lined up along the shore of the ocean, waiting to be consumed by the approaching beast. It was a relief to see them alive, but their demeanors concerned her. There wasn't anything that she could do about it, though. There was a small movement to her left. Her heart caught in her throat as she saw her father lying on the ground, his injured leg twisted at an odd angle. She rushed over to him and dropped to her knees beside him. He was unconscious, but to her relief, he was still breathing. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up. Standing over her were Maggie, Jenni, and a blonde woman that she didn't recognize. Maggie gently moved her out of the way so that Jenni could get a closer look at her father. "We need to get him to a hospital," Jenni said as she checked his pulse. "Is he going to be okay?" Sarah asked quietly, not sure that she wanted to know the answer. "I think so, Sarah, but there's a major risk of infection with the way that his leg is. He's also suffered a pretty rough concussion and a number of burns. He needs immediate treatment." "I'll go get the car," Maggie said, turning and running towards town. Sarah sat down in the grass and put her head in her hands. For her entire life, it had just been her and her dad. If something happened to him, if he didn't manage to pull through, she didn't know what she would do. Josh moved towards her to attempt to comfort her, but she shook her head and he backed away. She didn't want to be comforted just then. She only wanted her dad to be okay. She noticed that the blonde woman had taken a seat on the ground a short distance away. She was also staring at Sarah's father. There was an expression on her face that she didn't recognize. The woman must have sensed that she was being watched because she looked over at her. "You're his daughter?" the woman asked. "Yes," Sarah replied with a short nod. "I'm Lisbeth Erickson." "Sarah Dyer." "Don't talk to her, Sarah," Jenni said without looking up from her examination of her father. "She's one of the people that started all of this." "I'm not, actually," Lisbeth corrected her. "I was part of the carnival, but not by choice. Like I tried to say before, I didn't want—" "I don't give a shit what you wanted," the nurse snapped. "Now shut the fuck up so that I can concentrate." Everyone fell silent. Most of the other people left the field by now, and the only sound was the wind blowing through the grass and nearby trees. Sarah turned her eyes upward. She idly wondered how many other beings like Call were up there. She hoped that she would never have to see any creature like that again. Josh was standing a few feet away, his back turned towards her as he looked towards the coming dawn. He had been subjected to more of the carnival's horrors than she had, including an extended stay in the sea lodge. He looked like he was working hard to keep things together, and she could tell that he was just barely doing so. "There she is," Jenni said after what felt like an eternity. Maggie's car was crossing the bridge. The sheriff drove the vehicle up the gravel path as far as she could before turning into the field and heading their way. The headlights bounced up and down as the car traversed the rough ground. It stopped a short distance away. Maggie was jumping out of her door almost before the car came to a full stop. She hurriedly opened the back doors. Being as careful as they could, they all helped load her father into the back seat. He cried out once as they set him down, but he remained unconscious. Jenni propped him up slightly with a blanket before they closed the doors. "I wish we could bring you with us, but there isn't room," Maggie told her apologetically. "I need to drive, and it's best if Jenni is there if we need her." "I get it," Sarah assured her. "Josh and I will go get his car from my house and meet you guys there." "All right. Just be careful, okay? We don't know." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. They didn't know if some remnants of the carnival were still nearby. The Strigoi might be hiding somewhere, or some of the carnival workers might still be in town. There was no way of knowing for sure. "We will," Sarah told her. "Take care of my dad." Maggie stepped forward and hugged her. She had never done that before, and it surprised Sarah. It was a hug filled with warmth and affection. Within moments, she was returning the hug just as tightly. "I'll take good care of him," Maggie said as they let go. "I promise. Meet us at Cotswold Memorial Hospital in New Trent. You know where that is, Josh?" "Yes," he answered. "Good. See you both soon." The sheriff got back into the car and sped off towards town. Sarah immediately started heading back towards where they had left their bikes when they had re-entered the carnival. It felt like that had been a lifetime ago. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure that Josh was following. As she did so, she saw Lisbeth walking in the direction of the bridge. She put the woman out of her mind as they reached the bikes and pulled them out from the brush. It had been a pain to drag them through the woods, but now she was happy they had done so. Taking one last long look at the empty field, they started back towards Forgotten Tales. Epilogue. Michael came to the determination that he hated hospitals. It was a surprising determination to come to, as he had never had a problem with them before. He wasn't one of those people that got sick at the sight of one, or who couldn't go inside of one because of a phobia. Now that he was a patient, though, he completely understood why so many people despised them. It wasn't the constant poking and prodding from the nurses and doctors. It wasn't the fact that the lights in his room were always on, even when he was trying to sleep. It wasn't even having to call someone to assist him whenever he had to use the bathroom. What he truly hated about being in the hospital was the sheer boredom of it all. He was the kind of person that couldn't just sit back and relax. If he wasn't doing something to keep his mind occupied, he started to go stir-crazy. He'd only been there for a few days, and he was already beginning to crack. He was staring at the television mounted up near the top of the wall and mindlessly clicking through the stations when there was a knock at his door. He turned his head slightly towards the noise. It was probably some nurse coming in to check his dressings for the billionth time, or, if he was especially lucky, a doctor coming in to schedule another test. Nothing broke up the monotony like a needle being jabbed into him. To his surprise, it wasn't a member of the hospital staff that came in. Instead, Lisbeth Erickson entered the room and slowly closed the door behind her. He hadn't expected to see her after the events at the carnival. He turned off the television and set down the remote. "Hey, Mr. Dyer," she said as she walked over to the edge of the bed. "I hope it's okay that I'm here." "Michael," he replied simply. "What?" "You called me Mr. Dyer. It makes me feel like you're trying to give me a copy of the Watchtower. Call me Michael." "Okay, Michael." She looked around the room. "How are they treating you?" He smiled slightly. "Better than I feel like they are, I'm sure. I have to admit, you're the last person I thought would walk through that door." Lisbeth returned the smile. "Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm a bit surprised myself. I just wanted to stop by and thank you for helping put an end to the carnival. I know that you didn't do it for me, but still, it means a lot to me and the others." He wasn't sure what to say. "I really didn't do anything. The carnival disappeared all by itself." She shrugged. "Well, you were willing to help, and the end result is the important thing, so I still count that as being worth a thank you. So, yeah, thank you." "What are you going to do now?" "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I'm not really sure. I don't have any family, and none of the friends I had before joining the carnival were all that close. Some of the others are talking about staying in Lamplight Woods for a while, maybe longer. What do you think?" He smiled slightly. "I'm not exactly the person in charge of that sort of thing. No one is, really. If you want to stay, you should stay." Lisbeth nodded with an exaggerated serious expression on her face. "You know what? I think I will." She hesitated for a moment. "That guy, Bingo, I think his name was. He's going to be a problem, isn't he?" Michael looked away. "Yeah, he is." Well, when he's back, come find me. She held up her heavily bandaged hand. I like to have a word with him myself. Is he why the carnival disappeared? I think so. I think whatever was behind it needed all the power it could muster to try to stop him, so it had to stop sustaining the carnival and that strange world inside the Sea Lodge. She walked back over to the door and put her hand on it. She turned her head back towards him and considered him for a long moment. Finally, she smiled and opened the door. Be seeing you around, Michael Dyer, she said over her shoulder as she left. Michael settled back down to his bed and stared up at the ceiling. It was going to be interesting having the carnival workers around. From what he had been told, the Lamplight Woods residents that had been trapped inside the Sea Lodge didn't have any memory of anything that happened. It was likely a side effect of the parasites that had miraculously disappeared along with everything else. They just remembered being at the carnival before going home for the night. The former carnival workers and a select few of the Lamplight Woods residents did remember, though. All that it would take would be a slip of the tongue to potentially open Pandora's box. Then again, maybe not. Lamplight Woods had always been good at keeping secrets, so maybe this wouldn't be any different from the other strange events that had happened over the years. There was another knock on the door. This time it was opening before he even had a chance to turn towards it. Maggie entered the room holding a large plastic bag. She used her foot to close the door and gave him a smile. I see you still look like shit, she said. I feel like it, too, Michael admitted, pointing with his chin at his elevated leg wrapped in bandages. I'm starting to wonder if this thing is ever going to stop torturing me. Are you bored yet? Oh, God, yes. You don't have to call me God, but today I am your savior. I stopped over at your place for something. She went over to the room's single chair and emptied the contents of the bag onto it. She had brought the old Nintendo system from his basement, along with 2 controllers and a small selection of games. Winking mischievously, she began to hook the cables into the room's television. Are you allowed to do that? He asked. What are they going to do? Call the police? Maggie responded with a shrug. I know all the New Trent cops, so good luck with that. Now scooch over. He smiled and moved himself over as far to one side as he could. She climbed up into the bed next to him and handed him one of the controllers. He raised an eyebrow when he saw what game they were playing. So, what's wrong? He asked as he pressed the start button. What makes you think anything's wrong? She asked innocently. Come on, Maggie. I may be doped up on pain meds, but I'm not completely out of it. You only play River City Ransom when something is bothering you. She glared at him. You know, that big brain of yours can be a pain in the ass sometimes. She paused the game and took a moment to gather her thoughts. Whatever was on her mind was serious. He set down his controller and waited for her to speak. Jenni is leaving Lamplight Woods, Maggie said finally. She's what? Michael responded in surprise. She's leaving. She looked away. What she went through in that carnival, she's not the same, Michael. She's changed, and if I'm being honest, it's not for the better. We've been talking about it, and we both think it's best for her to go stay with family, at least for a while. She needs time to get back to normal, and normal isn't something that Lamplight Woods does well. I'm so sorry, Maggie. She shook her head slowly. It is what it is. How long do you think she'll be gone? Maggie hesitated before turning to look at him with barely held back tears in her eyes. She says a few weeks, maybe a month, but truthfully, I don't think she is coming back. He found himself searching for something, anything to say that would console her. He came up empty. When is she leaving? He asked instead. Tonight. She's getting a ride to the airport and heading to Salt Lake City. It was his turn to hesitate. Have you thought about going with her? Of course. She wiped at her eyes. She even asked me to. I can't, though. My dad is here. My job is here. I can't just leave. There's more to it than that, isn't there? Maybe. Yes. When she killed Poe, it was a side of her that I've never seen before. Jenni murdered that woman when she was completely helpless. I get it. I understand why she did it. And if I'm being honest, I was tempted to do it myself. It was still wrong, though, and I can't get it out of my head. They were silent for a long moment. Eventually, Maggie set down her controller next to his and laid her head on his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they just laid there, staring off into space and saying nothing. Bingo's going to be back, isn't he? She asked, breaking the silence. Lisbeth Erickson asked me the exact same thing right before you got here, Michael told her. And what answer did you give her? I told her the truth. Yes, he's going to be back. And what didn't you tell her? He looked over at her. When he comes back, he's only going to do so because he's gotten what he wants. He'll have become a god, or at least a reasonable facsimile of one. If we're going to stop him, we need to follow him into wherever he went and do it before he reaches his goal. Maggie nodded. Agreed. How do we do that? I don't know, he admitted, his hands balling into fists. But I'm going to find out how to do it. And when I do, we're finally going to put an end to that son of a bitch once and for all.